and the kind of lucidity that it brings in. So we will sort of go around, I will do formal introductions after we have a quorum, but I wanted to see if we can have quick introductions of people who are joining in. And if you want to just tell us where you are located, as well as, your interest in this topic. Suresh ji, do you want to start? You're on mute, sir. You're on mute. You need to unmute yourself. Maybe we'll go to Mr. Karsan Pindoria, because I think, Suresh ji, you have some mic issue. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Suresh Chitnis and I'm from Alameda, California. And the reason I'm joining is I want to understand the issue about the farmers' protest. I heard the side why the law was made, and I understand that law was in working for a long time. So why it is such a controversy now, that's what I want to understand.
Okay. Karsan Bhai, do you want to go next?
No, I don't. I just want to listen to Dr. Singh.
Okay. All right. So welcome, everyone. I think we sort of have a quorum. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. If anyone wants to sort of give us an idea of what you're looking for with this program, that would be awesome.
What I'm looking for is that what the opposition says, that it is bad for the farmers. However, I don't see that protest all over India. It's only in Himachal, the Punjab and Haryana. So I'm skeptical about this argument that it's bad for farmers. It was bad for farmers, then all over India it should be protest. Why only on those two states? So I'm inclined to believe that there must be some politics involved in this besides, any other issue. So that's why I want to clarify that. I want to learn about that. What is involved in it?
I think, should we go to Mr. Daniel? Do you want to talk? Daniel Beverick? Is everyone able to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay. So anyone else want to share? I think in a minute we'll go into the presentation.
Yeah. This is Dinesh Nilavar. So
Dinesh ji, namaste.
Namaste. Atul ji, namaste. From Plug and Play, I know you so long time. So basically, this is a global funded movement to defame. So all this democracy, not a free country, all are coming up based on the protest and all the actions taken by the government. So it seems to be a bigger one. We want to find out whether they're able to connect the dots and clearly prove it, and then show it to the rest of the public in the country. That is important.
Yes, thank you. Padma ji, namaste. You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. I will stop my video and audio now.
Okay. All right, I think we have a good quorum now. So I want to welcome everyone to this really interesting talk. And, I think all of us as Indian Americans cannot be untouched by this issue. This is farm laws in India, but they are being discussed all over the world. And we in India, as Indian Americans in the US, some in Canada, we are facing, the heat and have to explain to our political leaders, our congressmen, all the time as to why, what, and how is it positive, how is it, the pros and cons of it. So it's a perfect time now to go into understanding this issue with Mr. Atul Singh. So I'm really delighted to introduce Mr. Atul Singh to all of us. Many of you already know him, and he's a leading political thinker and economist. Mr. Atul Singh has a very diverse background, and I think he brings all of that into his strategic thinking, into his writing, and all of the talks that he gives. And his education has been in India, as well as at Oxford in England, and where he has studied philosophy, he has studied economics and politics. And then in Wharton, where he also got a triple major in finance, strategy, and entrepreneurship. So as a result, I think he has been also faculty at various places. He's taught at UC Berkeley, at IIT Gandhinagar. He's taught in Kenya and Africa, and also been a trainer at Indian military academies and in diplomatic, training circles. So I really think that, also I forget that I forgot to say that he's also an IPS officer. So, if we were missing, that element of the daring, he has been in Nagaland and Kashmir and has served there as well. Mr. Atul Singh is also a founder and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. And that is where I see him as the quintessential Renaissance man, because I really think the kind of article that went viral on farm protests and farm laws, it was one of the most lucid articles that I have read on this topic. And I'm really delighted that we get a chance to listen to him live today, all of us. And, we will open it up for questions later. But I think the way I want to frame this is, first of all, understand some of the historical background to this. Atulji, I think I want to start that conversation with looking at the farm sector in India, how you see it, and why the farm reforms were needed. I think a very simple question, but not a simple answer. So please educate us on that.
So one of the first things, first of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for being here at 8 p.m. on East Coast time. I'm sure you have better things to do. So we'll crack on and look at things through the prism of history. Now, remember, India has been an agrarian society. India was always a society that was fertile, and because it was fertile, particularly the Gangetic plains were susceptible to invasions time and time again. Before the Industrial Revolution, wealth came from the land, and fertile places had surplus. And those places supported great architecture, big kingdoms, empires, and you name it. Now, with India, we were extremely fertile. The rivers flowing down from the Himalayas, whether Sindhu or Indus or Ganga or Ganges, and their tributaries provided rich alluvial soil. You could grow 2, at times 3 harvests a year. And so there is an element of truth to calling India Sone ki Chidiya. We were lucky. We were a bit like Cambodia. We were a bit like some parts of Southeast Asia. I remember in Europe, France was the big continental power because France had better land and richer soil than other European countries. And it's only the Industrial Revolution and British naval ability that allowed it to pip France in the race for global empire. Now, why am I taking you all of this? Is because we have to understand agriculture through the prism of empire. because until the British came, yes, you had oppressive rulers, you could have 50% tax, yada yada. But at the end of the day, the wealth of the country stayed in the country. And if you pressed farmers too much, they would flee, and there was always arable land, and there was a limit to which you would tax them, because if lots of them died of famine, then you had a problem, even if you were a Turkish sultan. So there was a natural check, because your own long-term wealth dependent on keeping some peasants alive. Now, when the British come, the ball changes. The goal is really simple: profit maximization. It's a British East India Company. It's just like Facebook, just like Google. Many of you are in Silicon Valley. You know what it is. You've got to cut costs, increase revenues. And in any case, you don't care if people are taxed to the bone, because your power does not come from having a base necessarily in India and a base of peasants. Your power comes from controlling the resources of India. That's a distinction to remember. And you then impose heavy taxes. You take at least 45% of harvest. And what you do is, because you're clever, you don't do the dirty work yourself. You hire middlemen to do the dirty work, zamindars, money lenders. You just make the terms of payment, not just the payment high, but the terms of payment very harsh. So if you miss payment, your land will be confiscated and sold to the highest bidder, which means that people will not just give you income, but they'll also give you savings, which is capital. So you're not just seeing income transfer, but you're also seeing capital transfer. Because what is wealth? Wealth is nothing but income plus savings. That's it. If you earn $100 and you spend 90, you have 10 in the bank account. If you have saved $10 over 10 years, you have $100 in your bank account plus interest. If your grandmother left you another $50, that's $150. So it is it is simply the stock and flow. Now, what the British did was they sucked out, they diverted the flow and they sucked out the stock. And it was very clever. So the dirty work was done by middlemen. So the evil zamindar was some Indian chap, or the money lender, or the sahukar. And the good chap was the collector, who would give you justice. And the Kaptan, which is the IPS. So I still don't understand why we glamorize IAS and IPS. If you want to ask me who are the two biggest villains of India, it is the IAS and IPS, because they are the two colonial institutions. But then Indians, we've been colonized a long time. We look up to the anglicized elite. We worship the New York Times. We worship the BBC. We worship the Economist, which opposed India's independence for 104 years. And we look down on people who don't speak English. So I think that is also a reality of India. I think it's a reality of any colony. You can't just blame India. But the key thing is that historically, we had more famines during 200 years of British rule than 5,000 years of history. The rest of 5,000 years of history, the famines were fewer, they were less fatal. There are lots of, there's a lot of scholarship. And Kaleem Siddiqui made a great point. Others have made it. He wrote in the World Financial Review. I don't know how many of you have read my article. I'd suggest you please do. And please subscribe to the newsletter and like us on social media as well. Then you'll be able to help us produce better content and spread our content, because we don't have money from Jeff Bezos. He has got many billions. Everyone buys through Amazon. You can put our nonprofit down in Amazon Smile as well if you feel particularly, charged after my talk or after reading the article. But let's go back to Kaleem Siddiqui. Kaleem Siddiqui explained how British industrialization was in part funded by Indian exploitation, and you could make an argument that India deindustrialized. Now, I don't entirely buy the Shashi Tharoor hyperbole. There's an element of truth to what he says. Shashi Tharoor, of course, is part of the anglicized elite and is ashamed of speaking the native tongue. So it's a little rich to hear him talk about Britain. But the truth is, we left a terrible legacy. And that legacy was a near starving peasantry, very low land holdings, an agricultural system based on cash crops that suited British needs, and underinvestment of over 2 centuries. In fact, worse than underinvestment, the sucking out of capital. So we were left basically not on our knees, but on our back. So when India gets independent, we have a major problem. And that problem is, and we've had a traumatic partition. That problem is, okay, how do we feed our people? That is the history in which we have to look at farm laws that followed from 47. And I'm happy to go on unless you have another question, Richard. So that is the history. That is what we inherited in 47. And the reality is, from 47 to the 60s, we lived ship to mouth. PL 480 legislation by America allows us to get grains. It all goes all right until, sort of all right, until America enters the Vietnam War, and a Democratic president says, you've got to stop criticizing us and you've got to bring in farm reforms. And we bring in hybrid varieties. We adopt Norman Borlaug's model, who was an American agronomist. And basically, we bring in American hybrid crops, but we use the Soviet model because we want to plan for avoiding famine. So it is bureaucrats who decide stuff. You have very restrictive laws that are well-intentioned, actually. They are to avoid exploitation. There is the APMC, Agricultural Product Market Committees, that are set up that will buy local produce. Their job is supposed to, you can't even sell your crops to a neighboring district, forget another state. And the idea is that if you sell to the local guys and they are all elected and they control the markets, you will avoid the money lender, you will avoid the broker, and all the inputs. Remember, these hybrid varieties cost money. They need larger land holdings, they need water, and given the gradient, given the fact that the fertile areas, Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, as you've pointed out, are very flat, and the gradient of the rivers is conducive to building dams. And also, by this time, the British have already built some canals. So this is where all the investment largely goes. And they are the ones who grow the wheat, and even start growing rice. And they are the ones who basically ensure that after the 60s, the Green Revolution feeds India. Starvation is no longer an issue. Okay, other problems emerge. So that is the back story, that the current system has its origins in the trauma of the partition, American threat of ending the ship to mouth, and an adoption of a model that just could feed us. Forget about nutrition. We just needed to avoid starvation. With me, everyone?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that was a really good understanding of just the backdrop. I think the couple of things that I think I have understood is that after the Green Revolution, I think from then until now, there has not been any major reform in the agri sector, right?
No reform, actually.
No reform at all. Yes. So there was a dire need for that, to address it. Like,
forget major, there's been no reform.
There's been no reform. Like 1991 opened up the market economies for our industries, for various sectors, pretty much everything except agriculture was opened up to the market economy, and all of that license Raj and industrial, those subsidies and all of those things sort of went away, right, from our other sectors, corporate sectors. But agri reform again, still stayed on the table. It did not go forward until now. And so two things there that, why, so I understand that Mr. Vajpayee proposed some model acts in 2003. And, those have been sort of carried forward now. But do you want to talk about some of that? Because the big criticism that is coming forward is that it happened so suddenly, no one got to know anything, and we were not taken into confidence. So I think maybe some of that element before we go into the laws.
Okay, so very quickly, let's address what went wrong and why did we need reform? Because if we talk about reform and Vajpayee government, why was the Vajpayee government even planning to do that? So 1991, we had market reforms, but we didn't reform agriculture. Why? Well, agriculture by this time was functioning under the Soviet model. All right, because Nehru was very impressed, Jawaharlal Nehru was very impressed by the Soviet Union when he visited the Soviet Union in the 20s, because in the 30s, sorry, because the West had depression, the Great Depression, and in the Soviet Union, everything seemed hunky-dory. They took him to cafeterias, managers and workers sat together. Nehru bought the Kool-Aid, drank the Kool-Aid. And Nehru said, we will have 5-year plans too. But we Indians, nakal mein akal to lagate nahi.
Right.
तो नकल जरूर की, लेकिन जो है सोवियत रूस में इंजीनियर प्लानिंग करता था. हमारे यहाँ प्लानिंग कौन किया? आईएएस, जो साला इंग्लिश लिटरेचर पढ़ के आया था सेंट स्टीवन से, या हिस्ट्री जिसको नंबर नहीं आते थे. So we Indianized the Soviet model. So obviously we never industrialized like the Soviets. We don't make a missile. We still buy Sukhoi from the Russians. But we are not getting into that. The point is, the Soviet model was to ensure the APMC was derived from the Soviet model. It was very restrictive. You had a plan. We need these many tons. All right, fine. And you had to have local procurement, because then you knew what every district was producing. It helped you plan better. It gave you certainty, which was all in some ways all fine, except that what happened is APMCs, this being India, just as the IAS and the IPS are the biggest thieves in the country, bigger than the politicians. No one talks about it. Every land deal, the IAS is up to shenanigans. Everything hunky-panky, the SP is getting a cut. But we still, he was an IPS officer. Well, how does that matter? IPS equals the Indian pocket, in jokes, Indian pocket mar service, pickpocket service. The IAS is Indian arrogant service. They know all, they steal all. So we can go on. But the point is, the APMCs also had the same syndrome. They became the new oppressors. Local politicians and special interest groups came to control APMCs. They were the only buyers. So classic, they were basically, you had no choice. You just had to sell this to them. So they started offering low prices. Commission agents started taking greater cuts. They started making delayed payments to farmers. They didn't give receipts, so farmers couldn't use that receipt and get loans. The whole rural economy became a black economy. And this led to debt burdens, farmer suicides, everyone knows about it. So clearly the system wasn't working. At the same time, the big farmers, certainly amongst them, profited. They would have higher minimum support price. The Food Corporation of India would procure stuff. It would rot in the godowns. So you'd have overproduction and waste. And only a few people were mainly profiting from it, while the smaller farmers were basically crushed under debt. Now, all of that, all of that apart, the key thing, these lobbies became very powerful. But the key thing is that what people forget is that the Green Revolution relied on very heavy use of fertilizers, pesticides, water. So what did you have? First, the soil turned toxic. Then the water, the runoff water, then the rivers, then the ponds. Okay. Then what happens is, once that happens, then you start having rising cases of cancer, renal failure, stillborn babies, birth defects. I could go on. Daniel Pepper was talking about it more than 10 years ago. This is all going on. Now, to just give you the figure that Daniel Pepper reported in 2008, Punjab is 1.5% of India's area. Okay? And many of you are engineers. It was using almost 20% of the fertilizers. Sorry, 20% of the pesticides and herbicides. 1.5%. And using 20%. So order of magnitude greater. Now, obviously, there were major problems, but the most important problem was we were pumping out groundwater because you gave free electricity to farmers. They would just boom, put the plug on. Electricity was variable. Sometimes it would come morning, sometimes night. There'd be overflooding. So much so. And this is what people forget, is that 2018, 61% of wells were dug deeper than 10 meters. Okay. Now, this is a land crisscrossed by Himalayan snow. How can that happen? How can it happen? Every year you have snow-fed rivers. The water table can't go down unless you are going nuts. And the point is, you have gone nuts. You've gone on steroids. Now, yes, we traded food security for water security. Sorry, we traded water security for food security. It's like, okay, let's eat a ton of ice cream. Great, you feel high. But then you have a problem of diabetes later in life. So this system had too many problems. Environmentally, a terrible idea. Waste, poor allocation of resources, terrible. Mafiosi-like exploitation by APMCs, terrible. Subsidy from taxpayer for rich farmers, regressive, terrible. I mean, I don't know how many of you have read my article. I have a figure for you, which is the subsidy that Punjab was getting, okay, was greater than the average income of an Indian. That's, I mean, it is just staggering. The figure, I'll give you the precise figure. Punjab, the farming households were getting a subsidy of $2,385 per year in fertilizer and electricity. Another $190 in irrigation. These are all figures which are hyperlinked. We always hyperlink. Any letter in blue is hyperlinked. You can go to the source. And the World Bank tells us that the GDP per capita of India in 2019 was less than 2,100. So clearly this was madness. This is not just one pistol here, but two pistols, just to be sure. Two pistols, pull two triggers, and you're fine. We were committing suicide. So this whole talk that these reforms came out of the blue is hogwash, untrue.
Absolutely.
Different parties were talking about agricultural reforms, but you were worried. Why were you worried? You were worried because of three reasons. Number one, Indians are conservative. We still have the 1861 Police Act. No one has changed that. So Indians, we are a caste-divided country. We don't do change easily. गोरे साहब ने जो दे दिया वही चलता रहता है. जो सोवियत रूस ने दे दिया वो चलता रहेगा. We are people who optimize the system and tinker around the edges. On average, all colonies do that. But at least we have to confront it. We have to recognize that about ourselves. Look it in the mirror. So one of it is just natural inertia of Indian society. We don't do change. DM is still the Badshah, still has 20 servants, taxpayer funds it, very good. Everyone bows, everyone pays dowry to marry their daughter off to the DM. So, the people who are supposed to be anti-dowry take the biggest dowry. So part of it is that we just don't do change. We have lost confidence to create systems. Whatever chalta hai attitude, that is one. Number two, of course, is there are powerful vested interests. If you change, then there are people benefiting from the system. Big politicians, FCI people, dominant castes, especially the Jats in Western UP, the Jatsiks in Punjab, the Jats in Haryana. if they get angry, they're a violent people. Look, go back to the latter days of the Mughal Empire. They're all rebels. The rest of India is far more quiet, far quieter. This is historically rebel territory. And they have a taste for violence. And everyone says, Tanne, you go to Haryana, you can feel it. Tanne batata hu main. Lat de. So
Hockey sticks होती है कार में जरूर सबके.
Hockey sticks, lat, what, सब होती है. पंजाब में तो बंदूक चलती है. So you see, so no one wanted such an upheaval. So there was a real fear of upsetting public, vested interests. And three, of course, there was also this fear, and that is genuine, that, okay, we change the system, and then what happens? Will we have a food security problem again? So let us recognize there was inertia, there was also vested interest, the fear of it, and there were genuine fears. It's not that, everything was, ill-intentioned. But at some point, and I think this government had no option after the reverse migration to villages, they had to bring agricultural reforms because the status quo wasn't working, just wasn't working. And you cannot allocate resources, especially when your economy contracts by almost a quarter. Okay, the economy has contracted. You don't have money to persist. So you sit down and you say, boss, what can we do? Oh, we are misallocating resources. Someone says, we've been talking about it for a long time. There's been a parliamentary committee report last year. It's in my article. And it was all party. And everyone agreed. Everyone agreed that there had to be change. So then you say, okay, what do we do? Let's bring in that reform. Okay?
I think never let a good crisis go waste, isn't it?
Pardon me?
I said, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Well, that doesn't apply here. They didn't necessarily decide to do it. That has a different context, that you use a crisis to push through a reform. Here, their hand was forced.
Their hand was totally forced. And, I think I had seen...
It's not that they necessarily, I think, planned to do it. I think they are being blamed and painted a villain. But the reality is, given the contraction of the economy, given the fact we didn't have resources, given the fact that we are misspending, given the fact that water tables are going down, given the fact that the urban poor had gone back to the villages. Now, the biggest incentive for any government is to win the election. If they hadn't brought in agricultural reforms, they would have lost the next election. Had to bring it. All right, because over 83% of parliamentary areas have rural component. They had to bring these reforms just for their own survival. So their hand was forced. In fact, in December 2019, there was a parliamentary standing committee that published a major report. And it said that there was urgent need for radical reform. And it asked the government to inform Parliament about the steps taken in this direction within 3 months. The government didn't do it in 3 months, by the way. You can say COVID came. The government did it much later. It did it 6 months later.
Absolutely.
So Parliament, if you look at the parliamentary report, everyone is in it.
Yes.
All parties are in it.
All parties are in it.
So it is not, and it's a unanimous conclusion. It's not that there's a dissenting voice. So the interesting thing when I hear Congress leaders saying, oh, this is by surprise. Hang on a minute. I have a hyperlink to that report. I have read that report.
Yeah.
Indians don't read. That's another big problem we have. We talk.
Yeah.
You don't read.
But I think all of us know that in the Congress manifesto, they had similar clauses for farm reforms.
They had. Yeah. And I'll come back to when you said that Atal Bihari tried it. There were talks many times of reform. Manmohan Singh government as well, not just Atal Bihari. But every time people felt, my God, if we do this, it'll create a big problem. Because remember, Mahendra Singh Tiket, the father of the junior Tiket, led a big protest in Delhi, and Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP surround Delhi from all sides.
Right.
And so it's very easy for those farmers to hold Delhi hostage, and no one wanted that. And so part of it was just fear. And so that is what people shied away from it. But eventually, this happened, And the story in international press is minority, farmer, poor and oppressed, and evil Hindu majoritarian government bought out by corporate big players.
Absolutely.
Well, it's a simple David and Goliath story. And what is very ironic is I looked at the lady talking about Aussie, which is the first line in my article. She works for a publication, very trendy, hip, and she is Bengali, and she says, "Will the world step in?" And she's Bengali, went to Presidency College. Look at her choice of music, all foreign bands. And the interesting thing is this Bengali Brahmin from Kolkata is talking about Jats in Haryana.
Right.
It's a little rich, and talking about the world to step in, as if India is Syria.
Right.
Now remember, she comes from the comprador elite. The Latin Americans have a great term, comprador. What is comprador? Comprador is the collaborator with the colonial power. India's anglicized elite comes from people who sold out. Most of them are collaborators. They want approbation from white colonial masters, and they are more comfortable with their colonial masters than with their peasants. So this story rings true. This is an evil thing. Now the reality is it is nuanced. Why is it nuanced? Well, one, there are genuine reservations. Farmers do fear that, okay, right now the justice system in India has collapsed. So what do you do if you're a farmer? You go to your local MLA, he exerts pressure. But they fear, okay, if there's an Amazon executive acquiring crops, and even though the legislation provides for safeguards, what happens if they don't listen? Going to court means nothing in India. So can they get their local MLA to exert pressure? The reality is that's the insecurity. So there are genuine fears amongst farmers, number one. Number two, of course, all the vested farmers who had got a lottery ticket don't want the system status quo to change. Tiketh is a man worth millions. He doesn't want it to go. So obviously he's fighting. No one gives away power easily or privilege easily, as we know from history. So they are fighting. And then the third is this genuine fear in misinformation, which the opposition and of course the ideological opposition of many of the Western press has filled. Now, the ironic thing is that this is what most people don't realize, that India has done exactly what America and Canada were demanding. What most Indians don't know is that, this dominant Western press wants to, or American press, I shouldn't say Western press, wants to have its cake and eat it. What do I mean? At the World Trade Organization, Canada raised 65 questions over India's farm policy over 3 years. 65. Now, of course, because you want the Sikh vote, Justin Trudeau is expressing concern, or papers are. America has been constantly criticizing India's agricultural subsidies. So when Americans say, hang on a minute, how can you do this without consultation? The response is, guys, boys, ladies and gentlemen, girls, take a deep breath. You've been lecturing us for a decade to reform. We have done exactly what you've told us. You've been complaining against us in the WTO. And now you're saying that we should not bring in a market system you told us to bring in and retain the Soviet system. Now, the tragedy with India and Indians is they don't study history and they don't know how to speak and write and frame things properly. No one has said that, look, hang on a minute, do you want us to retain the Soviet system?
I want to say one thing, though, that at least on the farmers' bills, the Biden administration has sort of put its stamp of approval. Also, the New York Times, which is the first one to bash India, has, the opposition that the lobby that's doing all this work here had to put an advertorial, and they were not, they did not agree to write an article there. So at least there is some sort of, restraint in the United States, but Justin Trudeau, he cannot help himself.
No, the US is restrained absolutely because in terms of policy, not the media though. The media has been very ideological. But the reason it has been restrained is because Joe Biden is a seasoned hand. Number one, they actually do like these protests. They do like these reforms. And number two,
Yes.
they need India's support against China. So the whole, response of the Joe Biden administration has been measured. People like Anthony Blinken, etc., are very seasoned. But the discourse has gone over the top, partly because they are fed stories by anglicized friends in Delhi, and partly because ideologically they are utterly opposed to this government. They see it through an ideological lens. They see Modi as a counterpart to Trump, and they therefore have, the narrative has been colored and completely distorted from reality.
Right.
If you look at many farmers organizations, including Maharashtra, which is where I think Dinesh is from, Shetkari,
the Shetkari Foundation by Sharad Joshi. I think they have supported.
Yes. So I mentioned it in my article. They actually have welcomed it. Shetkari Sangathan. They've said that, and they've always been consistent about asking for farmer reforms. So the protests are confined to less than 8% of India's area. Very tiny. Someone said it, of course. You don't have protests happening in Bengal, Assam, Tamil Nadu, in the Nilgiris, which I mentioned in my article. They've never had the benefit of MSP. They grow carrots, they grow other stuff, they sell in the market. So this policy has basically benefited a particular region of India, and it's benefited because at that time, this was a region which could have produced huge crops. So they did serve the country at that time. They helped us avoid famine. And yes, it had its relevance. Yes, it was a policy that wasn't exactly thought through, but it did serve some ends. But its time has come and had to go, and it has. And the three laws that have come in are very reasonable and well drafted. If you read the legislation, they give a lot of freedom away. The essential commodities have been diluted. You can buy and sell not just across district lines, but across state lines. So on the whole, they also offer a framework for price mechanism. So the laws are fine. The big challenge, of course, will be implementation and the judicial system. What happens if things don't go as per law? Because in India, that's when all bets are off. The judiciary is a joke. We have no judiciary.
We have no judiciary. And the fact is that, even like CAA, which is, there's so much protest here, it's still not notified in India. It's not implemented out there. But here we are facing the heat of
and it's misrepresented again. At the end of the day, if you look at the whole point about giving refugee status to minorities except Muslims, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, there's a reason. Because look, when in 1971, 22% of Bangladesh was Hindu/Buddhist. Now it is 3%. So in Muslim countries, there has been an extraordinary persecution of minorities. So it makes sense to give non-Muslim minorities refugee status. All it's giving them is fast track route to citizenship. So
right. So going into the three laws, I think, like you just said, that they address a lot of the decolonization, first of all, like, whatever. And the one thing that I have to say is the Modi government has taken many of the bulls by the horn and tried to reform and create. And maybe this is one of, even though it was under the pressure of the COVID, economic problems, but they have done that. And the three laws are, like you said, very well thought out. There's geographical freedom, where earlier they were only able to sell within their districts. Now they can, sell across wherever they want to, not just in the mandis, but to corporates directly, or become direct dealers, right? That's one thing. And the second thing I understand is that the stocking limits have been removed, except for emergencies, right? Which in this case allows corporates to come in, which is, again, maybe I want you to talk about that, as to people are afraid of the corporates becoming these big behemoths who, again, the David and Goliath story coming into play here. But I want you to sort of address that from the pros and cons of it. And secondly, and thirdly, actually, the contract farming laws, right? That was the other one where, again, I think I've sort of covered that. and the pricing. They are saying that the MSP will not go away. So now the protests actually are asking about that, isn't it? That the MSP should not go away. But so where is that failure of communication?
I think the government has always been poor at communication when it comes to policy. It has been good at winning elections, but it never, I mean, look, the GST was terrible, the way it was communicated. It was poorly implemented. Demonetization was also, the demonetization circular was full of errors. So that is a systemic problem in India, because you get diplomats who can't write English, forget others. All right, so we've had a massive problem in simple drafting in India, because you just remember, regurgitate. So you get great software programmers, or decent ones anyway, who can do the mazduri, but you don't get people who can present an argument and argue for it. Now, number one, let's go through some very important and quick things. Number one, there are genuine fears of corporate takeover. There are farmers who fear, okay, Ambani, Adani come, they give us a good price, then they price out all the competition, and later they'll give us poor prices. That's a genuine fear. And what if we don't get our prices on time? There'll be some IIM Ahmedabad dude who won't give a damn. You can't bring any pressure, because right now you can't go to the judiciary, but you can go to your local MLA, and your local MLA can do a gherao. That's how things work. So they fear, okay, what happens? What happens next? So that's a genuine fear, and that has to be addressed, and that I think the government is trying to address, but they are not doing it effectively. The minimum support price exists, so of course APMCs have not been disbanded. They just have to compete. So they'll have to become less mafiosi. Maybe the APMCs will reform themselves. So I think the key thing is that in India, people don't like change. And so one of it is communicating this change is about choice. And so I see no farmer, no food. And the response to it is Soviet system leads to famine, or it is not no farmer, no food. It is like rich farmer, rich farmer, poor worker pays for rich farmer, pays rich farmer. That's your story. Because really the subsidy is going from the rest of India to the Punjabis, whom they may be poor by American standards, but the Punjabi household is rich by Indian standards. And it's causing environmental devastation. I personally think that Greta Thunberg is well-meaning. She's just a girl. She's a kid. Somebody must have sold her the story, and she jumped in to be the hero, the heroine. Oh, I will save Indian farmers. And the reality is, Greta, do you want India simple? Do you want India to run out of water? Do you want environmental devastation, degradation?
Stubble burning? How about that? Right?
Many things, but we haven't communicated the different aspects of it. And I think some of the fears are genuine. Some of them are exploited by political parties. Some of the celebrities are just misguided. Attacking them instead of explaining the situation is silly, makes you look intolerant. And I think the whole point is at the same time communication, but also creating some mechanisms and safeguards, because we will need that, because there is a genuine fear of corporates taking over, and we have to address it. That is a valid criticism, especially over time. What happens if you have only one buyer in an area, or just Amazon appears? Then what happens? And Amazon says, I'm going to buy all the grain, and you can't sell to anyone. So it has priced out everyone over time. And now there's one more point Keshav Goyal makes, that taxes went up to 65. Sometimes they went up even beyond 65, Keshav. And even under the Mughals, there wasn't really a flat rate. There was Aine Dasala, so it could be up and down. It went up when Aurangzeb came in power, because of course he needed money for wars. So it is really difficult to say, oh, it was this figure. Modern taxation is far more linear and clear. Medieval taxation was far more variable. And remember, if you couldn't pay your tax, basically the land was auctioned. So it wasn't just revenue that was being taken. It was intergenerational savings. Sometimes it was savings of 10 generations, 12 that went away like that to Britain. So you have to think of it not just in simplistic terms, but understand the nuances of exploitation.
Right. So yeah, I mean, thankfully we're out of that extraction economy of the British, but there were certain elements of the colonial residue that still remained in these laws, especially the Essential Commodities Act, right? That was the one that was pre-colonial or pre-independence. So that is sort of, it's being modified now, isn't it?
Now there are unless there's war or an extreme situation, farmers basically have freedom, finally.
Finally, exactly. So I think before we open up to questions and have people ask some questions, I think a couple of things that we need to talk about is maybe I want to ask you about Fair Observer, because I think as far as I could see, Fair Observer just has a lot of editorial content and a lot of, it's sort of the dehyphenated journalism that today we cannot expect out of New York Times or Washington Post. They always have that bias in their reporting. Whereas I think what you have tried to do is create that platform where we can get, unbiased reporting, or at least fair journalism. I would like you to say some things about that for our audience.
So let's take a step back. The Economist started in 1843. Who started it?
The British.
Okay, what sort of British?
The colonial.
No, it's not as simple as that. So it was British who believed in liberalism and empire. This was started 14 years before 1857. They genuinely believed that free trade would lead to progress and Britain would be able to civilize the savages, brownie fuzzy wuzzies, blackies. So they only hired, and they still only hire from Oxbridge. So there's an inherent bias. In 1953, they supported the coup against Tehran because they say Mossadegh, they saw Mossadegh as a lefty guy. In 2003, they supported the war in Iraq. So it's always had a neo-colonial DNA. Simple. People are defined by their background. Okay. The New York Times. What did they do in 1953? What did they do in 2003? Exactly what the Economist did. The New York Times has always been the voice of the saviors. They want to save the world. And as the Africans say, Lord save us from the saviors. So the New York Times and Washington Post, I could go on. Who owns the Washington Post? Jeff Bezos. Who owns New York Times? Well, publicly listed, but controlled by the Sulzberger family. So what we were trying to do when I started this was very simple. Let me be blunt. I was a corporate lawyer. I was an IPS officer. I was a corporate lawyer after Oxford. I came here, at Oxford, the Economist gave me a job. I don't want to work for John, especially if I beat John 25 times in debating and I won a scholarship, but John got in because daddy paid his school fees. Sorry. There are glass ceilings in these organizations. So I can either be a comprador elite, I can be the equivalent of the ICS officer, basically applying butter, cleaning the tabletops and polishing the shoes of the white master, or I can choose and say, I want to create something different. And I'm not saying we are not biased. There are plenty of biases in Fair Observer. We recognize that different people have different biases. So what we say is, okay, you're an Indonesian Islamist? Good. Publish with us, but be fact-based and well-reasoned. You're a Greek communist? Excellent. Publish with us, be fact-based and well-reasoned. These are the editorial guidelines. And what we try to do is simply say that, not that we don't have biases. You have many biases on Fair Observer. You get my article, but you'll get people who are anti-BJP as well. And I say, yeah, but you've got to be reasonable. You can't just write crap. If you want to criticize anyone, just be well-reasoned. You can't say, oh, I don't like you. Why? Because, oh, you smell. Okay, I don't like you. Why? Because, oh, I don't know, I just don't like you. Well, that doesn't fly. Okay, so the whole idea about Fair Observer was to challenge the dominant narrative. It's the world is not a symbol, and in India we've never had one holy book, one God. We've always had this ability to understand ambiguity, multiple narratives. Look at the Mahabharata. You can look at it from any perspective. Karna, perfectly valid. Duryodhana even has a very valid worldview. Arjun, Krishna, Yudhishthira. So we are very comfortable with that sort of multi-philosophical prism. And I very much come from that Gangetic tradition of philosophical suppleness. So I said, okay, we'll look at the deeper issues behind the news, we'll provide context, and we'll provide many perspectives. And today we have nearly 3,000 writers from 90 countries. People respect us for the quality of our work. The big articles I have done on Kashmir at a time when the New York Times is going, oh, majoritarian. It's like, hang on a minute, let's look at the history of Kashmir. I mean, my mother has known Karan Singh. I don't know if he's dead or not, the former ruler of Kashmir forever. You know, my family is an old Rajput family. I'm very cognizant of the history of my land, and Kashmir it was always complicated, partly because the dominant players were Kashmiri Muslims who discriminated against Ladakhi Buddhists. And if a woman, Kashmiri woman, married an outsider, she lost property rights. And what people forget about Kashmir is that if India is such a terrible country, how was there ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits in the valley? In Pakistan, no minorities exist really. They've been chased out. Bangladesh, they've been chased out. So I'm not saying India is perfect. We have our problems. We have many ills. We have to fight them. We have the issue of caste. We have the issue of, you know, the anglicized elite. Discrimination runs deep in India. We still worship the stupid IAS and IPS officers, the good for nothings who clear one exam and think they are God's gift to humanity. And one day the guy sits in agriculture, the next day in culture, and the third day in finance. We have a very colonial system of governance. We have colonial laws. But having said that, we are fundamentally a tolerant society, and we've been colonized a long time. We are coming to terms with our condition. We are not as bad as we are made out to be. At least we haven't committed genocide of the Native Americans and practiced slavery. So my whole point was, it is time that the monopoly of the British elite and the East Coast elite in world news could be broken. And I'm very glad to say I'm the only non-white editor-in-chief of a world newspaper. Not that Indians care much about it. Some of you might, but I always jokingly say my article on Kashmir was read more by the CIA people than the IFS officers I teach. In fact, so terrible was the 2020 batch and the 2019 batch that I asked them to write a memo on the strategic priorities of India, and 4 out of 36 handed in homework. So I always jokingly say, you know, I'm read more by the enemy than my family.
So I think we will subscribe, though. I think I do love, so, you know, a lot of those editorials that I've read, especially when I read the farm, especially the one you wrote on farms, farm bills really did go viral. And, you know, it was forwarded many times around in my groups. So
that's good to learn. Finally, after 10 years, the article on Kashmir didn't go that viral. I don't know how many of you have read it. That I wrote after Article 370 was repealed. And then, of course, last year, I wrote a big article. That's huge. I wrote it with the former RAW chief and a retired CIA officer on India-China tensions, the whole history of it. That's 11,000 plus words. That's bigger than a book chapter. But there was nothing out there explaining the history of the conflict. So we had to write something explaining it. So, I mean, we do deep explanatory work. At least I do a lot of that, because I find when it comes to India, there's a lot of noise,
Yes.
celebrity.
So this is
What's the
something I
point?
think we will all like to read, because we do need, and we need to start sort of building on that sort of, narrative in the media and creating our own media platforms like you have created. So much, thanks to you for creating that.
I mean, the best way all of you could support is sign up for the newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. If you are on it, YouTube, especially YouTube is big in India. We have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Fair Observer. And we've hosted some very interesting people, including Vikram Sood, who was chief of RAW. In fact, we are hosting Ram Madhav on 16th of March, 8 days from now.
Great. So that's fantastic. I want to see if others have questions. Do you have questions? You can raise your hand and I can, or put it in the chat. Anyone?
The answer, Keshav, it's not as simplistic. I would be careful of taking the Shashi Tharoor model. Blame everything on the British. Yes, they accentuated it. Most people didn't really know their caste. True, but there was also...
Caste is not a Hindu word, first of all. It is a Portuguese word, and the British...
It's a Portuguese word, but
I have written a thesis on caste, Atul Singh ji, and I will forward it to you, because caste,
look at travelers before. They talk about the divisions in Indian society way back, even during the Gupta time. They talk about the Chandals. So I'm saying that yes, the British played divide and rule, but every conqueror
only the Chandals.
And what's new? Every conqueror does that.
Yeah, and not only the Chandals. We had our own reformists who were working.
Sure, we did.
We always did. So it was not as if the British came in and they were reforming us. In fact, they did create the ossification of caste, which was not what we have is a more matrix-like structure called Jati and Varna. And that is a whole different debate.
No, I agree with that, but let's not lie to ourselves and say that we were a very united society and everything, because look, the British did it, but they could do it also because we were deeply divided. I'm a Rajput. No two Rajput clans fought together. In 1527, I can lie and say, oh, we were great and glorious. 1527, Rana Sangha had a 9:1 numerical majority. And still we lost because we were retarded. I'm very scared.
I will share with you a study that we are doing on the Mewar Rajputana, and how it has totally changed, kept the reason we are a Hindu.
Hold fire. I'm a historian and I've studied my battles. So what I'm saying is, if you study the battles,
yes,
you see that fundamentally poor tactics, poor strategy, even Haldi Ghati. Rana Pratap got down to the plains. It's like, hang on a minute. You compare that to the battles of the Europeans and the great generals. And so, my point is simple, is that we've got to be honest and look at us in the mirror and say, okay, these are the great things. These are the things we sucked at. This is where we'll work at and we'll improve. That's it. Otherwise, if we say everything is, yes, of course, the British played that game. Of course they did.
Right.
Wouldn't you? If you were a dominant imperial power, you would do the same. Those are the rules of the game. So yes, I agree with you. I agree with you there was social mobility. I agree with you there were reformers. I agree with you, some of the Rajputs might have been all right, but let's be honest. The Rajputs have a shit record in battle. Absolute crap.
I'm going to share with you a book that Dr. Omendra Ratna is writing. He's writing a book.
I would be happy to read the book, but I don't get swayed easily because I look at the big battles and I look at the global scene. And I look at, okay, the British had Nelson at Trafalgar. They had basically Duke of Wellington at Waterloo. Before that, in 1799, he was in Seringapatam. I was 17 when I read Blitzkrieg. By Erich von, the battle plan of Erich von Manstein that led to the conquest of France. So I come from a military family. It's in my DNA.
Right. So talking about, I think we may as well want to conclude at this point about the farm bills. And as I think largely what you have said, Atulji, is that the farms definitely mean reform, and they are meant for the better of the farmers and the agri sector of India. But
they have to do it because they want to win. 83% of the seats have agricultural, areas.
Backdrop,
So
right.
this is basically in some ways something that was overdue, something they now need if they want to win the election, something to, uplift the farmers a little bit, at least before the next election. So, and all in all, this is a very positive step. Yes, some safeguards, some mechanisms. You always know reform is perfect. There'll be challenges. It'll also lead to unintended consequences. No one would have thought of some consequences. But on the whole, this was inevitable and essential. We don't,
like
as a country, have a way out.
Right. Like you said, only 8% of the farmers are protesting.
Yes.
And
not even 8% of the farmers. These areas from where they are protesting are only 8%.
The area, and the farmers are probably like 6% or something.
Even
right?
less. It could be as little as 2 or 3%. It's difficult to get hold of the numbers.
So these are directly linked to the Green Revolution. So wherever the Green Revolution was implemented, there is a certain vested format that that drives the whole. There's a very set or guaranteed purchase price, guaranteed government public distribution system that purchases everything, and so they don't want to let go of it. That is the whole thing that seems to be coming out of this whole right farmers.
Yes, and remember that they are helped by the fact that Punjab has produced, because of the trauma of partition, has produced the maximum immigration, or one of the initially the maximum immigration. Now, of course, you have Telugu, Gujarati people, but there are huge Punjabi expat communities in Canada, and UK, and US, and they are able to pressurize their local legislators and spin a story, and so the whole narrative is colored in a way that
I think that is a
distorted.
very interesting point to bring up, which why is it coming? Is it impacting the farmers abroad in any which way? Why is Rihanna tweeting and why is Greta tweeting about this? Why is it becoming
they've been told? I personally think very simple. They don't know, but they are celebrities. They like to look good. They want to fight for justice. It's very much part of the woke movement. And so they are told, evil farmers, Hindu fascist government, tweet, and it's easy. So they tweet, and I think most farmers in the rest of the country, they are not protesting. They don't care. So someone, as Rajiv has said, that
I think he's saying that it doesn't matter what Rihanna and Mia Khalifa say.
The answer is
more important that the farmers and the stakeholders know that they are being misled, motivated misapprehensions.
The farmers don't know about these things. They don't really care. But the key thing is that what it does damage you, all this coverage, is it damages your ability to conclude business deals. I have a friend who's raising an India fund. Okay, he used to run 2.7 billion. I won't tell you his name. He's raising an India focused fund, and everywhere he goes, oh, there are protests. So the meeting, instead of being, okay, are you going to invest, becomes, oh, what is India going through? So there is massive costs to what people don't realize. There are massive costs, not just in India, to all these protests and destruction of property, but there are opportunity costs to doing business, to attracting investment, to loss of confidence. So
you're saying is this Indian American
economy is growing because we contracted a lot and we began from a low base. The point is they probably knock off a percentage point or two. If you did all the mathematics, we don't know. One would have to do a thorough analysis, but they could. I wouldn't be surprised if they're knocking off 1 or 2%, which we could have done more, because they do damage perception. And as a poor country, what we need is really capital, because our banks are in poor shape. So the more investment we get at this moment, the better it is for us. And India is a country with great growth opportunity. There's no other market as big as India. And so these protests are not just inconvenient, they are harmful, particularly for our economic growth prospects. So I wouldn't take them so lightly and say, oh, what they say doesn't matter. No, you need to have your narrative, and you need to win the narrative battle, because at the end of the day, we may talk all we want, but at the end of the day, the reality is that people talked about company as Company Bahadur. Even today, Indians may talk big, the Rajputs are very brave, but how many Rajputs are saying remove the 1861 Act? They are not. How many Rajputs are running 5 kilometers under 20 minutes? They are not. So there's one thing, chat, but what I'm talking is more substantive. It's like, show me the color of your blood, and put your money where your mouth is. So I think the narrative is not to be underestimated, because the narrative stuff is, in a way, a good way to keep your psychological domination over another power. You are deciding what is right or wrong, and the other person wants your approbation. So you've got to learn how to play that game with a smile and a laugh and a wink, and with nonchalant swagger, which is one thing we are not. We get very touchy, or we get very we go through this extremes. We either get very touchy, or they said this, or we get very slavish, or we want approbation. The reality is, no, this is your point of view. You're mistaken. Smoke less pot. Maybe you'll have a better idea.
Right. I think there is a question here from Mr. Ganesh Ramakrishnan. And what he says is that this is a great presentation on dismantling Soviet system. And right now we can infer that there is no democracy in India. There is a suppression going on, and
no, there is that is all false. I mean, let's be honest. There was no police, violence, even though policemen were attacked on the Red Fort. So you can have this narrative, but you can say, well, what do you want? Do you want a violent minority to rule a docile majority? Is that what you're arguing? This is just false. So the point is that how do you represent misconceptions to lawmakers, American lawmakers? The Indian embassy has been sending my article a lot. You can distill things, you can craft arguments and send it. That's the way to do it. Just craft good arguments. And say these are the issues, and you're just mistaken. And give the facts, the figures, the statistics. That's it. And be reasonable, and tell a good story. Look, do you support the Soviet model?
I think that's a good question to ask these city councillors who are coming at us,
Yeah, sure. You want your country's told us to reform. Your country, Canada, has complained 65 times in 3 years. Sorry if I'm getting some of the figures. I'm getting tired now. Muddled up, but what do you want? What do you want? You want us to not do what you've been telling us? So either you were lying then, or you're lying now, or you were mistaken then, or you're mistaken now. What do you want? What do you want? I mean, you're being like that girl. I love you not. I love you, I love you not. Come on, stop being so sentimental. Or that guy who, stop being schizophrenic. This is not a bad Hollywood movie. Decide what you want.
Right. All right. So this is, I think that's any more questions we can take?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, shoot.
Sorry. Little feedback here.
Yeah.
So I missed the first 12 minutes because of technical difficulties. Will there be a summary available of what you talked about, or that article that you referred to a few times?
Yeah.
Where is that available?
I'll just put in the link. I thought they had there's even here it is. I'm sending it via link, and there is the article. It's a long article. Here, there you go. Please see if you've got it. Just a second. Okay, I don't know what's happening. Yeah, it's gone to everyone.
Yeah, I see it.
Those are all the facts and figures, and those for those who don't read, let's say you have lawmakers who don't read, then we created one with pictures. Here, you can click on that. That is for Americanos. You know, the land where you can, America, the land you can buy everything except culture.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, that's what we
Can I
bring
ask
here.
a question?
Yes, sure.
My name is Suresh. I was wondering if before passing the law,
Yeah.
if the Modi government would have spent some time in explaining what the law is and asking input from the farming organizations, do you think it would have gone smoothly?
No. Because look, those who are losing ticket, would he agree to changing the law? Of course not. Then they would have created more hangama.
And isn't it true
India,
that they had 11 rounds of consultation?
they had it afterwards, by the way, and they didn't even accept anything. So this is India. They would have done dharnas, yada yada, and then the law wouldn't have been passed. So this is all fiction. Oh, if you had talked to us, nothing. The reality is there was a parliamentary report. Many farmers were consulted over the years. And so this talk that, oh, there was no consultation, if only there was consultation, is fiction. In fact, the reality is that, the reality in my view is that they have not been firm enough. They've had 11 rounds of talks and they have not said, Luis proposed this, and they haven't accepted. They've been very poor in communication. They've not, here they have not been, in Kashmir they were decisive, but here they've not been decisive, not at all, in my view.
Isn't that what they are saying, that they were surprised by this law? They had no idea.
The parliamentary report was there in 2019. So yes, if you think that the parliamentary report has no meaning, then it means that no one has any faith in the system. Then it's a question, should we even be a parliamentary democracy, or should we just stop it and either choose a dynasty ruled by an Italian, or choose one party ruled by the BJP? But the point is, when people say, oh, they had no idea, I'm sorry, there's a parliamentary report which is hyperlinked in my article. I just don't believe it. And if you don't think anything was going to happen, it just shows arrogance.
Does the average farmer has access or can understand
the average farmer knows nothing. The reality is about these things. The average farmer didn't even know about the Green Revolution, let's be honest. But the farmer leaders certainly had a clue. They knew this was coming. Now they are whipping up the sentiment, because in India you have to, it's a young democracy, largely illiterate people. You have to whip up emotion. Even today, Bollywood movies are about emotion. Look at how the hero goes on, waxes lyrical, doesn't just kill a person coolly and calmly and quickly, unlike James Bond. James Bond kills. Our guy, Amitabh Bachchan, will have dialogue bazi for 20 minutes. I mean, my family knows Amitabh, and I always say it just makes me vomit. It's when you have to shoot, don't talk. I can't stand this, in India, there's too much chat. Yeah,
right.
And that is true. The Committee of Chief Ministers, it wasn't just MPs. The talk about this has been going on for 20 years, reform, 20 years, because the water tables have been dropping, cancer has been rising, food stock is wasted every year. So much is eaten by mice. So much rots. There is no investment in storage. There is no investment in cold storage.
Right.
So there's a complete misallocation of resources. It's a Soviet system. The Soviet system collapsed because of misallocation of resources. So yes, you cannot have a full market system. It's agriculture. There's seasonality. I understand. There have to be safeguards. Every country has it. But there's, you have to be somewhere in the middle. You can't have, a system wherein you put in a lot of money, take away water from future generations, waste what you produce, subsidize richer farmers, and thousands of farmers commit suicide. That system isn't working. You've got to try something. You've got to change something. And if you say, oh, you weren't think these reforms came as a surprise, I'm sorry. Tough luck. Too bad. In a family, you can't have one person eating 10 rotis and the other guy getting 1 roti. At some point, you know, yes, you are Bhim, you get 7, but the other guy gets 2 or 3, you know. That is the way it works out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. It's been an honor. Hope to see you again. And make sure, don't forget, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on all social media channels, because if you don't go out and spread the word, no one else will. Certainly not Shashi Tharoor, and certainly not Matthew Walker of the New York Times.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atul. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste, namaste, namaste.